welcome back. In this particular session, we'll be looking at class components versus functional components. So there's one thing called class component. Initially, it was most popularly used in React among React developers. And even now, if you come across some code snippet or some pieces of code, you might be seeing that code written in terms of these class components. So what are these? Why we needed to have something else in order to replace them, and even if now you come across one or the scenario is such that you are required to deal with them, edit them, modify them, it's better to have an understanding of what they actually are. So let's see. I hope you can see the screen now. In this project of ours, we have one app.jsx that is getting rendered here from index.js. So right now we can see this is how a functional component is. So basically, functional component is everything in which we make functions for every separate component of ours, and that is precisely what we've been doing up till now. We've been creating components, we've been creating functions of them, and then importing and exporting them and integrating them back together in order to make the code work. So initially, it turns out that there were two ways to add state to our React application. So the functional component, in that we had separate React components, and let's say if someone says, I want to make this into a class, this is actually a functional component and I want to change it into a class component. So how can we do it? In order to do that, first of all, you have to add the word class here. Since it's a class, it doesn't need to be called. And then further, you have to write extend components that will be fetched from these React modules. All right. So we renamed that function to a class, and the name of the function, the class remains same app. We remove those braces because a class does not require to be called like a function, and it is extending a component property from the React modules. Okay. The next thing that we need to do is whatever you want to return inside these class components. So whatever basically we were returning in a functional component, we need to create a render, and whatever you were returning inside them, you can just cut this and paste it inside your render method like this. And you can see this is how it looks like. So if we compare this to our code of functional component, let's say if I copy this and I undo whatever I just did. So this is how my functional component looks like, and this is how my class component looks like. So at a first glance, if we see, someone might say that there isn't much difference between a functional component and a class component. All right. Apart from these additions of these extend and having a render method inside this. So that's actually not the actual reason. You can head over to this documentation regarding state and lifecycle. So it turns out previously the reason people converted their components to class component is because it was required to have a state in your React project. So the state that we have been playing around with the usage of hooks up till now in many of our previous codes, initially a class was exactly that was required in order to perform that. So in the documentation, you can see that you were required to convert your functions into a class to have a state like we did just now. So you can head over to this particular part where it says converting a function to a class. So the first step is saying that with the creation of an ES6 class, we can extend that component part from the React modules. And then whatever you had, you have to put it inside the render method. And now what is this? Okay. So in order to understand that, let's try to look how this entire class structure, whatever we had, how it actually looked like. Okay. So first of all, I would highly recommend you to give this particular article a read, especially the part where it says how to convert a function to a class. And state and lifecycle, you are pretty much aware what this is. So if you head over to this particular file called class component, comp for short. So this is basically a counter. As you can see, this has a state initially, the count is 0, and inside the render method, inside this return, you have one header h1 tag and a button. All right, and inside this button we can see that we have an on click method which is equals to this increase function, and inside this increase function you can see that we have something called a set state. So that this set state is a pre-built function inside React, specifically for this class component of ours, that allows us to pass over some new values to the object, which is here. So it allows to pass new values to the object that is stored inside this property, this state. Okay, so we have count over here, and used by the usage of this predefined set state, we are able to update the count over here, and that is what actually a counter does. All right, so now what we can do here is, first of all, we can import it similarly the way we did to our functional components. All right, C class comp, and inside here similarly the way we created custom components with this self-closing tag, you can mention this class comp like this. And now you can see, if you hit this particular button, and according to this logic that we just saw, that on pressing this on click button, this counter increases. All right, so this is how a normal simple counter app works that is using class components. All right, so this works similar to hooks, but the problem is that we have too much of boilerplate. All right, so now we are discussing what is actually the problem involved, that we can see at a first glance when we are performing something that we have already did. All right, so this creation of this counter app, creating a button, and you must remember in one of the previous session we created such counter in which we had two buttons, one plus one and the one minus one, and we achieved that by the use of functional components. So what is the difference when we are out doing the same thing with the use of class components? So the first problem that we can see is there is too much boilerplate code. All right, in here, as you can see. And second thing is, it's sort of hard to read. And the most irritating thing of these classes, this statement, which is all over the place. I mean, this is everywhere. If you can see at every one or every consecutive line, you can see there's so many of this everywhere. So if we head over to this particular documentation in 2018, if I'm correct, the React team addressed this issue and some other issues that were pertaining, and came up with the idea of hooks. All right, so you can check out this particular documentation. This is their official page, and you can go through this particular video as well in order to understand what created or what sort of issues actually motivated these people to make this concept of hooks and why it came into existence. And inside this particular documentation, hooks FAQs as well, in here, if you can see. So the first thing is that when they came up with these concepts of hooks, what they actually said initially was that they're encouraged to start using hooks in the new components you write. As you can see nowadays, everyone prefers functional components over these class components. And the one good feature that they provided us was that the class components that you wrote initially, you can anyway integrate them in your code, whatever you are writing, without deleting them or something. And you can actually create a mixture of this functional component and class components. Now, one important point to notice here is that you will not be able to use these hooks inside a class component. You will have to have them inside a functional component only. So these three are the major documentations with this regards. And now if you can see in here, this is actually the same code that is written whatever functionality this class, this counter app by the use of class component is performing. This functional component is again doing the similar thing. So if you compare this, inside this we have so much less code, all right, and we are able to achieve the same thing by the use of our React hooks, all right, specifically this use state method of ours. Okay, this was going to be a short lesson. So that was a quick session on what are class components and how they function, so that if in near future you come across some particular piece of code or a code snippet in which you see this text written all over the place, and this keyword written all over the place, or the class components, what do we mean by this extends, and what was actually the purpose of using this classes and all. So I hope now you will be able to basically understand and fundamentally modify or alter or understand whatever particular code you will face. So that will be all from my end for this particular session. I'll see you in the next one.